First things first, Konstantin, how are you?
I'm well. A bit tired, a bit hot, but good.
Good to hear. I think we're all a little bit hot, but before we get into the, well, it's kind of part of it, I suppose, but I want to go back to your previous record quickly, which was about love and an interesting take on it, not the standard way of looking at it.
Yeah.
Now with this new record, you go into fear.
Yeah.
In your opinion, how do those two things, concept, and it's a big question, but how do they relate to each other?
Well, I guess love has a lot to do with fear. I mean, fear of commitment, fear of being alone, fear of never being alone. You know, but I don't think that's what I did. I don't think it's a self-referential choice from going to love to fear. That was like a completely different choice. But of course, the topics seem far away, but like everything, they're much closer together, as you might think. And I tried to concentrate not on the romance part of love back then,
right,
but maybe on the more difficult and dark aspects, which in the end have a lot to do with fear. So it's not that far away.
Mm. So once that whole process of love and touring had ended, was the concept of fear already in your mind to pursue for the next record?
Well, normally when I start a record, I start from scratch, from zero. I don't constantly write songs or keep like a diary or something. But at the point that I want to make an album, I say, okay, I start this album and I want to finish it at this date, and then I have a topic and I start from zero. So I don't think there was like right after love. There was obviously it's going to be about fear.
Mm.
Yeah.
And in the middle, or in the meantime, and you've always been doing this, you've composed for other projects, soundtracks.
Yes.
How does this influence the direction the next project will take? So, for instance, with this new album, The Horror, how did the projects you did in between albums influence what you were going to do?
Well, that's something that I have to look back on. It's not something that happens like very consciously. But if I think about the projects I did, that it makes kind of sense. I did like a project with a jazz pianist. I've worked with an orchestra. The whole thing went kind of more in a classical direction for me. So in a way, it does make sense. Yes.
And then I believe it's partly at least the sounds of the album is partly an homage to the crooners.
Yes.
So I want to go back to your early days quickly, because when you started making music, did you want to be a singer?
No, I don't think so. I think I always wanted to be a writer, like a composer or something. Okay. I wanted to be a film composer, and when I started my first bands, I didn't think I was going to be the singer. Mm. I was playing the guitar and writing the songs, and there was another singer, but at some point I realized, okay, if I want it a certain way, I probably have to do it myself.
So you started singing.
Yeah.
Did it come naturally to you? Did you like it?
Yeah, well, it wasn't that hard. I mean, it was new to me, but I think kind of it made sense in a way that I started to sing, yeah.
And one of the influences on the new album is Frank Sinatra. So was that already one of your influences back then?
I don't think back then, that's like we're talking 20 years ago. I don't think that back then it was more kind of like Kurt Cobain was my influence or something like that. Mm. But I guess his voice from very early on kind of captured me in a way. That's still the thing. The second he starts to sing, I'm there. That's my kind of thing. So it has been an influence for quite a while, definitely. Mm. Yeah.
This might be difficult to describe then, but what is it about his voice?
Well, the whole crooner thing is actually a technical thing, right? It was the innovation of microphones. It was for the first time it was possible to sing very in a low volume over an orchestra. Before you had to really, like an opera singer, had to be sing very loud, and that fact made singing very cool in a way. That's I guess if you want to put it into a word, what crooners do is it's very cool. It's very smooth, and it's very detailed, and that's actually going back to this technical novelty of these new microphones. And I think that's kind of what I like. I have a big sound, but I also like to be very dynamic with my singing.
Yeah. And yeah, how has it affected your own singing? Is that something you try to do to get that style of singing in a way on the record?
Well, I don't want to compare myself, of course, but if I say it was the influence, of course, I was trying to find my own crooner voice. I mean, it kind of was always there. My timbre is kind of darker, like these singers, but yeah, I definitely put way more effort in the vocal recordings this time than I did ever before, because if I go out and say this is my homage to the crooners and to Sinatra, you don't want to do it half-hearted. You want to give it the best shot you can, and I still don't want to compare myself, but of course I was trying to do it in that direction, and there's, yeah. Well, and still kind of make it my own style. Yeah.
Because I do think you have a very, I suppose original style in the way you deliver your songs and kind of the sound that it creates. So going into a new record then, you say you focused more on the vocals this time. How does the music around it kind of take shape? And are you very conscious of how your voice will sound over certain musical elements?
Well, also the whole backing track in music was inspired by that era, like this like 50s, the more kind of string-focused orchestral Sinatra sounds. I was going for the full sound, not just singing over another backing track. So it was obvious that it's going to be a quite orchestral album, and yeah, well, it started out with just listening to a lot of these records and then trying to understand how it was done, what are the colors of the sound, and then putting it together, and yeah, trying to make something new or something that's my own from it. So, yeah.
And when you think about these things, when does the kind of the topics or the concepts that you talk about, when do they come in? Is it alongside of the music, or does it come after?
Well, the topic needs to be there in the very beginning. That's always the first question. When I start an album, the first question is, what's the topic? Because otherwise I can't start. That's not necessarily the idea that I need to make a concept album. It's just helping me to get started and to find the sound, to find my lyrics, to find all the whole universe of this album. So that's always the first question.
And then is then the next step to, when you think of this concept, in this case fear, do you then start by delving into your own psyche and kind of figuring out how you look at fear and what your perspective is?
Yes, well, that's the one thing. I'll try to figure out on my own, in my own head, what I think I want to say about the topic. But also I do a lot of research. I mean, movies, books, pictures, other music, and that helps me finding kind of my perspective on the topic.
Can you give me one example of something that kind of instigated something that kind of made you think a certain way? Maybe a horror movie, or?
I didn't watch horror movies actually, okay. Because that was pretty clear from the beginning. That's not going to be like a horror album. I use the word horror because it's such a beautiful word.
Sure.
How it's written and how it sounds is way more beautiful than fear. But no, the kind of horror or the kind of fear, I mean, it's more kind of a sociological one, or like I don't know, like a personal one. It's not about actual fear of something, of killers or something.
But so I imagine then, obviously, all that's going on in the world has an effect on that, because
Yeah.
there is a culture of fear, it seems, these days.
Absolutely, and that was actually before Fear came that thought that I can't do an album at this point that is completely not commenting or not trying to make sense of what's going on. I think that was kind of the first thought, is this needs to be in some way a political album. And Fear was then the obvious choice, because I think that's the one thing that all these events have in common, that there are a lot of decisions made based on fear. There are a lot of elections won because of fear. And yeah, so that was the string of thought. First was the idea of, okay, has to be for the first time in a way political album, and then there was the topic, obviously.
And I remember the first, going back to the beginning of the interview, first time I spoke to you, when you talked about love, like you say, you didn't want to tackle the obvious route, the romantic side. And so now dealing with fear, was it a struggle for you, again, in a way, finding the interesting or the less obvious ways to think about fear?
Well, yeah, sure, definitely. But if I say it's in a way politically or sociologically motivated, it's not. I don't write like political protest songs. Right. It's more about this mood, this kind of feeling that's kind of spreading, and trying to make sense of it, and trying to find out where this comes from. And then, of course, yeah, that's always a challenge to not be too obvious. But, then again, sometimes it is obvious, and sometimes it is very literal, and then again, it's not. But maybe one example is that I've written about my nightmares, which actually happened. Okay. I dreamt these nightmares, but I tried to interpret them in a way that it makes sense that I dream them now, and what I have to do with what's happening in current culture.
Well, that's an interesting thought, and I'm not smart enough, but this goes into psychoanalytics and all that kind of stuff. So, had that been something you had always been interested in? Is that something you delved in before?
Well, it's the same here. I read the stuff, I don't understand it, but it's very inspiring. Right. That's like if you read Freud or Lacan or stuff like that. It's so complicated, but it's a very interesting take on things, because it's so, on the one thing, so unscientific, because it's just an opinion on how things might be. So in a way, it's very artistic. Right. Well, the early writings of psychology, and but I find it very, very inspiring, and it's like an obvious go-to. Like when I write about fear, that I first read a lot of psychological books about that. Yeah.
I'm just gonna see if I can.
That's nice. Bit of a trumpet solo.